wait maybe around 30-40 seconds and then we'll get started.
So we are gone live now, and we have also started the recording.
Yeah. We'll wait maybe around 10-15 seconds and then we'll start. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arvind Sahai. I teach here at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. And today we are very happy to be having this webinar on using behavioral science for branding purposes. And I'm even more happier and proud to have two people who have a lot of experience and bring a lot to the table. So let me introduce you to them. Our first guest today is a gentleman called Subramanieshwar, more easily known as Subbu. He is the Chief Strategy Officer for Asia Pacific for the Mullen Law Lintas Group, head of the Global Planning Council, and as of 1 week ago, also the Chief Executive Officer for Lintas in India. He's got more than 25 years of experience. He's worked with brands like P&G, Citibank, General Mills, Tata Tea, Tanishq, Idea Cellular, and so on. The list is so long that it'll take me forever to go through it, so I'm not going to do that. He's won many awards, India FEs, APAC FEs, Global FEs, and he's also been the jury chair at the J. Shiat Awards. For those of you guys who are not aware, that's a pretty prestigious thing to be doing. He's a regular columnist, and he is a visiting faculty at many institutions, including the IIMs. He's the author of a book called Brands to Stands, and it's got some very nice stories about how some leading brands of India have created themselves and become big by having a point of view, by taking a stand. That's what the Brands to Stand is about. Subbu lives with his wife and son in Bombay. He's an avid reader, enjoys traveling. I think that's something that we have in common. I enjoy traveling. Our other speaker for the day is the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer of NSE. NSE, as you know, is our largest exchange in India. And actually, in terms of the number of transactions that it has, correct me if I'm wrong, Arijit, it's probably the largest number of transactions in the world now.
Yeah.
And so Arijit is responsible for the marketing and communications for NSE as a company, rather large responsibility given the nature of the company, the largest exchange in this part of the world. He oversees marketing, branding, and corporate communications and is involved in defining and developing the comprehensive and integrated communications program. He's previously worked for Odwan Global Capital, for Ogilvy, for the Times of India, and he also, like Subbu, has an interest in giving talks, and he has talked at many of the IIMs. He's overseen many thought leadership initiatives in the past and maintains internal employee relationship programs within the company as well. So, gentlemen, very, very happy to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time. What we will do today is we will start off by sharing our thoughts on this idea of behavioral science and how it can help with brands, the process of branding. And I will take around maybe 10, somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes to share my thoughts. Then I will invite Subbu and then Arijit. And after that, we will have some Q&A with the audience that's present. So without further ado, I'm going to start sharing my screen, guys. I hope it comes out. I hope my screen is visible to everyone. So why are we even interested in this topic? We're interested in this topic because, we all have behavioral biases. There are so many different kinds of behavioral biases. We have anchoring, we have representativeness, and so on. And because we all have these behavioral biases, it kind of influences how we look at brands. And brands exist in and of themselves, but brands also exist in our minds. How we perceive brands is what gives brands life in a sense. And so therefore, behavioral biases are an integral part of how we perceive brands. And therefore, if we can understand our behavioral biases better, if we can understand how our brains work with behavioral biases, then it makes it a lot more easier, a lot more efficient, and perhaps even effective to help us engage better with brands. And so therefore, ultimately, given that we have these behavioral biases, how can behavioral science help us to get better customer engagement with brands? So what are some behavioral biases that we have? Now, if you look at this motorcycle in front of you, if I were to ask you the question, what kind of a bike it is, just by looking at it, most of us probably would not say that it's an electric bike because it doesn't look like what we have in our minds as what an electric bike should look like. It looks like a normal sporty bike. It could be a Pulsar, it could be an Apache, it could be a Yamaha, but it definitely doesn't look like an electric bike. And this kind of is an illustration of the behavioral biases that we tend to have. You can call it representativeness or anchoring. But because we have those biases, we tend to see and match it to a pattern that might exist. We match it to the way that our brain works in terms of how the brand exists in our minds, or even in this case, just a simple product. This product is being launched as we speak. And so, in a sense, our brain behaves in a certain way, right? It tries to conserve energy. Our brain has this tendency to conserve energy. We don't like to go intensely into stuff and then to figure out what is happening. We look for mental shortcuts, the heuristics and biases that we're all familiar with, that Daniel Kahneman has made so famous. And some of the most prevalent biases or heuristics are these three: representativeness, availability, and anchoring. So when you saw a normal sporty bike over here, essentially in your mind, these were the biases that were working. This bike represents that category. This bike has a presence in my mind. It is easily retrievable in my mind as a sporty bike, not necessarily as an electric bike. And so my brain is kind of anchoring on this. And therefore I look at it as a sporty bike. And I'm somewhat surprised when I realize that actually it is a nice performing electric bike, which is targeted at people who would buy Pulsars and Apaches. And therefore, there are these biases that we have which influence what we see. Literally, I see a sporty bike, even though the bike is an electric bike. It is presented to us as a sporty bike. By the way, this bike actually performs like a Pulsar or an Apache. And to that extent, it will fit in what I have in my mind. Similarly, we tend to group, right? When I saw this bike, I grouped it as a sporty bike. I categorized it as a sporty bike. Again, this is about representativeness. It represents the category. There's a very famous example that scientists have kind of looked at, which is if there were 100 people, and out of those 100 people, 80 people are athletes and 20 are librarians. And if I chose one at random and brought him into the room, and this guy was short and bespectacled and thin, and I asked him what was he, the chances are pretty high that he would say he's a librarian, even though it does not matter what he looks like. If 80 out of 100 are athletes, then 80% odds are that he is an athlete, not a librarian. But because he looks like a librarian, short, bespectacled and thin, therefore a lot of us will think that he's a librarian. So we tend to categorize, we tend to group, we tend to pattern,ize, which is a very strong behavioral bias that we have. Another kind of bias that we would have has to do with the fact that we tend to look for differences. We tend to look for contrasts. We tend to look for reference points. And this gives us an overconfidence, right? There's a natural corollary of this natural pattern in our head. It gives us dopamine, by the way, that we tend to go for stuff that is different, and we are different, and we try new stuff because we like to see new stuff coming into our lives. We like variety and so on, which is partly driven by this whole bias behavioral heuristic of overconfidence. So as you can see, we are subject to a whole bunch of biases, right? Heuristics. We tend to imitate others. This is a 7-month, 8-month-old kid imitating Gangnam Style, Psy. And Sometimes when we imitate others, we can do some bad things, right? So the question, therefore, is if we are all subject to these biases, right? We're all subject to these biases. So how do we see brands through these biases? How do we evaluate brands through these biases? What happens in our heads when we are evaluating brands? Now, if you look at brands in many different ways, one way of looking at brands is that they exist at different levels. Maybe a brand is simply a name or a color or a logo, or maybe as a brand is also something that provides me functional utility, or maybe a brand has some emotions that are associated with it. I like this brand, it makes me feel good. And at a highest level, you could argue that, I have a relationship, I have some kind of a bond with the brand. I literally feel not so good if the brand is not there. And the most strong brands, Maggie, for example, you could argue exists at all these levels, and we have strong bond with Maggie. Whereas newer brands, of course, struggle because they haven't yet established that emotional connect, that affect-based connect that is very important. So if we by the idea that this is how, by and large, we look at brands, that they exist at multiple levels in our minds, that the strongest ones are the ones where we have some long term bonding, then the question becomes how do the biases actually filter what we are thinking and feeling about the brands? Now, it turns out that we have a lot of tools and approaches to be able to understand how the biases are playing out when one is evaluating something. So at IIM Ahmedabad, for instance, we now have a lab which has been funded by the NSE National Stock Exchange. We call it the Center for Behavioral Science, where we are looking at many such problems, a lot of the problems in the financial service context also. And we look at how behavioral science influences our evaluation of brands. So if I have, for instance, the availability or the representativeness heuristic, a new brand that has come into the market, it looks and feels like a sporty bike, but it doesn't have a brand name yet, right? A company like Matter, the bike that you saw was a bike that is being launched by has been launched by Matter Motor Works. Doesn't really have some resonance in my mind. I don't have any emotional affiliation with a bike called Matter. I may have some emotional affiliation for Pulsar or Apache or a Yamaha, but nothing for Matter. So the challenge for Matter essentially is for that new bike which is coming into the market, which is an electric bike and is targeted at Pulsar or Apache buyers, is that I need to work through the heuristics, through the biases that people have, including this representativeness and availability, to help people come to the brand, right? Now, it turns out that representativeness, availability, heuristic has implications for product design for me. If a person who is going to buy an Pulsar or Apache would want to consider me as a potential purchase for himself, then that person would want to feel that this brand, this new brand that is trying to sell itself to me, looks and feels like a bike in that category. And hence the design elements reflect that. It looks and feels like a sporty bike. Similarly, a Pulsar and Apache buyer would probably want to feel that throttle and the feeling of shifting through the gears 1, 2, 3, 4 as you accelerate through that. And therefore, an electric bike that has a gear. Most electric two-wheelers, actually, as of this time, no other electric two-wheeler in the country has gears because people have not thought about it, right? If I shift gears metaphorically now to the financial service industry, for example, and we talk about a person who is on Zerodha and he or she is buying and selling stocks on the stock market, NSE or BSE, then how do they approach a particular brand? How do they approach a particular stock? Part of it, of course, will be driven by analyst reports, their own evaluation of how they see the company doing in the future, the charts that they may have studied. But part of it will also be determined by their perception of the brand. Is somebody going to buy a company like Hero Motocorp, or they're going to buy a Bajaj, or they're going to buy a TVS if they are considering buying some stocks in that particular sector. And part of their thinking and feeling and evaluation will be determined by these brand related aspects, which will then drive the behavior, because we know that human behavior is driven by many of these factors, the biases that we have, the behavioral science that drives it. And so, therefore, our decision making is a combination of all of this. Some of it is conscious, heuristic driven, biases driven. Some of it is very deliberate and reasoning driven, and so on. And when we combine all of this, we come up with ways and means to see how we can improve our brand engagement process with whatever we have in our repository. So for this particular bike, for instance, for the primary target group, we could argue that these guys do want sporty looks, acceleration, manual gear shift. They want a battery that works and that won't catch fire, right? Uh, Given what has happened in the past summer in India, where a lot of electric two-wheelers have caught fires. So that's something that is there on the minds of many people. Will my electric two-wheeler catch fire? And so if you have a brand that gives you a liquid-cooled battery management system and powertrain, then you are automatically also providing a sense of comfort. You are taking care of the behavioral biases and evaluation processes that are going to take place in the mind of the customer. And we can build on these examples to look at how one can leverage the different kinds of behavioral biases that people have through the lens of behavioral science and the tools that behavioral science provides us to be able to then deploy those insights in product design, in constructing a positioning statement for the brand, and constructing different messages, whether it is on television or it's online, Instagram, 5-second, 10-second, 20-second clips, which are designed to be able to engage with particular dimensions of the customer's attention. And so let me close on that note, which is that behavioral science has a lot to do with how we can construct and engage with brands. And our challenge going forward essentially is what are some ways that we can go forward as we engage with different kinds of brands using different tools of behavioral science. So I'll pause there. And we will take the questions for later. I'm going to invite my colleague Subbu now to take us forward on this particular topic from his perspective.
Thank you, Professor. That was a wonderful perspective you gave on behavioral biases and then the nature of brands. Fantastic to hear you.
Thank you.
I would like to speak on something that I'm very passionate about related to this, a subject on which I wrote a book also, which I called it Brands to Stands. And every brand needs to have a point of view today. It's more than a proposition. How do you go beyond a proposition to a point of view? So it started with my asking a question. What does it take to be a super brand? I mean, we keep talking a lot about brands. We live in the world of brands, like we're probably submerged in the world of brands. So to answer that, I said we need to see why a mere brand is not good enough today. Okay, once upon a time when we said, there was like when you called something a brand, it's a brand. Okay, it was the holy grail of marketing, defender of shareholders' business value, and all those kinds of things. So you paid a premium for that. And today we live in a world where there is no difference between one brand and the other. Everything is a brand. Now then, how is like, why is it happening? And why being just a brand is not good enough anymore? So I thought, like, to me, if I have to stick my neck out and say, and the state of brands is brands are bland today. In their desperation to be different from the competition. And what are brands doing? They orchestrate ostensibly unique propositions to shore up their positioning, whether it is their technological superiority, magic ingredients in service, or even exclusive associations with audience. These things keep happening. But these are, to me, nothing more than transient tactical fixes, especially with the quick parity brought on by technology. Today, everybody has access to the best of the technology where everything can be matched in a short span of time. If I may exaggerate, you may have an advantage of +1 or +2, and the short shelf life of that could be less than 24 hours today. So eventually and inevitably, the positioning of one brand is being replaced by another, exposing the superficiality of the whole exercise of building brands. Now, this clutter has made it extremely difficult for brands with genuine competitive advantage to stand out and resonate with the audience. Now, besides, what is also happening with most brands, content to merely stay afloat in the sea of sameness. Like, there's a tyranny of tangibles like that is happening, and everything is caught in the sea of sameness. There's no difference between one and the other. They often slip into an induced inertia, I would like to call it, unless forced to respond to external forces such as the market and the competition. So what it did was, I set about trying to change, trying to change the dynamics of how brands are perceived today, envisaging a new path for building them. Now, when I look at it, see, I always argued when I keep having huge debates and discussions and sometimes serious, passionate arguments with my clients when I keep saying brands are not part of marketing. They get psyched when they say, "What are you saying that?" I always say the brands are part of culture. Long before marketing as a subject has got created, brands have existed in this universe for thousands of years. So look at societal, cultural, political, or historical changes that have shaped our fundamental convictions, truths, and ideas, stirring our souls and consequently imparting deeper meanings. See, that's what brands are all about. When I say a brand has to have a deeper connect with me. It's not brands are magnets of meaning. It has to create a deeper meaning for me in my life, for me to have a relationship with. So that deeper meaning to acts, gestures, symbolisms, and relationships in our lives helped rekindle my whole thought process about this thing. The other context which I would love to give is when I look at people, that's from the world of brands. When I talk about what is happening in the world of marketing, world of brands, and then how everything is getting commoditized and everything is caught in the sea of sameness. And the question of what is the difference between one brand and the other? How do we create these differences The other, when I look at from people, and people, particularly millennials or the Gen Z that you talk about, in the hyper-connected world. Now, when I look at both of them constitute roughly about 63.5%, which is pretty much the same average in the world also, the average in India. When I look at them in the hyper-connected world, they're increasingly looking for authenticity and transparency in what they did and what they were associated with. That's what they're looking for in their lives. They're no longer content with successful, lucrative careers. They're willing to quit their jobs to follow their passion. That's amazing to see that. So in a new social order governed by democracy and open source culture, they're desperately seeking occasions that would bring out their true potential, unleashing the human potential within them. That's what they're looking for. Now, experience, meaning, and purpose is what they're seeking, not just lifestyle, power, and status, which used to be the order with the earlier generations. To me, this was in a way a return to compelling Eastern philosophies like the Indian Swadharma, the Japanese Ikigai. So, and if brands had to find a way into this evolved existence of where people are going into, so it had to be by following a similar path to empowerment and enlightenment. So this anthropomorphic connection, I would say, was all the more pertinent as brands were usually taken to be the human face of companies. That we infuse them with personality traits, physical characteristics, and all those things. So it seemed worthwhile to explore whether brands could tread the same path that human journeys were taking. That's the best way to understand. The best way to understand and evolve a brand and build a brand is to understand them as, look at them as human beings, just as the way we evolve as human beings, and the brands also evolve. And some of the best of the brands actually lead humanity. So over the years, when I look at it, brand stories too had transitioned from the rational to the emotional. We felt, see, look at it, like earlier you would have heard about this idea called the unique selling proposition, USP and all. That was in the world of products and all. What's the big differentiator? How is my product different from the other product? Then it became emotional selling proposition, then brand selling proposition, then came in me selling proposition. And then probably we have reached the stage where we talk about the holistic selling proposition today. So over the years, as I said, brand stories too had transitioned from the rational to the emotional to the symbolic and all those things. What we felt was it was perhaps time to take it to the next level, into the realm of spiritual. I firmly believe that brands had to be endowed with an inspiring, timeless, and higher order purpose. And this was the genesis to the initiative we had taken to make brands more real and what they can be for our own unique way of enhancing or going beyond the concept of brand positioning, which is what I called it the brand point of view or the brand stand. The brands, it's from brands to stands. Brand, when a brand takes a stand based on a higher order purpose, that is, I'm standing for something. Like it's based on a belief. Now, if I can make my belief the belief of the audience too, that's when you have a great magic happening. So this was the backdrop too. So if I have to put it, when I would say a brand taking a stand, a brand stand, or a brand point of view, it's a definitive declaration of what it believes in and fights for. A distinct standpoint on why, and you would have heard about Simon Sinek talking about that it's important about it's not the what, where, the how, it's about the why. And why and for whom it exists, influencing everything a brand does and what it does not do. So that is where one thing is about brands to stand. So when I look at it and the way we have gone about practicing that, which I keep talking about in my book. My book is not a theoretical book. It's a book which has got 25 stories of some of the best of the Indian brands, which we had applied this thinking and how we built them. So what I'll do is probably I'll talk about one or two stories if I have time for the second story. Let me tell you a very popular story, and which you'll all relate to. All of you know this brand Tata Tea. It's such a fantastic brand. And when Tata Tea came to us many years ago, about 10 years ago, and they said, see, what was happening at that point of time in our country is tea was declining. Okay, India is primarily a tea. Britishers, I always feel Britishers along with cricket, they also brought tea into this country. And tea was declining. And coffee was picking up, aided by the cafe culture. And the younger people were giving up tea and actually moving to coffee because drinking coffee is seen as a lot cooler. Carrying a coffee cup or glass or whatever, these kinds of things is very, very cool. And at that point of time, there was no Starbucks. You had this Cafe Coffee Day, Barista and Gloria Jeans and all this coming up, Costa Coffee and all those things. That was one part of it. And Tata Tea was having a major issue. They have quite a lot of these regional brands. Like when you go to Assam, it's called Brahmaputra. You go to down south, there's Chakra Gold, Kanan Devan, and Gemini Tea, and different kinds of things. Are like it's many. And what was happening on the business front was Hindustan Unilever was leading them 5:1, both in terms of market share and in terms of the media spends, the resources that Unilever was putting in. And there was this serious question from Tata Tea, do we continue this business or should we exist? Because there was also the backdrop in the larger context, what happened is post the GATT agreement, buying tea in auctions was a lot cheaper than actually producing tea. And Tata Tea was getting out of producing tea from their plantations. These kinds of huge issues were happening. And then let's give one more shot and then see where this business can take. And Tata Tea was very clear, going forward, there will be only one brand. The brand will be called Tata Tea, and you will have these sub-brands like Tata Tea Gemini, Tata Tea Agni, Tata Tea something called, but it will be one brand, which is honestly great, one decision good. And the other thing they said is, we clearly want younger audience to come into. Younger audience are moving away from the category itself, forget about the brand. And India is a young country. 60% of these people are less than 24 years or 25 years old. If we don't do business with these younger people, there is no reason for existence. You can't exist, like, as a brand, as a business. So we said, if we have to do business with young people, we have to be interested in what young people are interested in. It can't be about come and see. For years, tea has always been sold on color, taste, aroma, strength, and all those kinds of things. We have to be interested in what young people are interested in. So there are two interesting conversations, interesting things that happened when we started immersing ourselves with the consumers. And there are lots of one-on-one discussions and in groups and all this. When we met, there's a very interesting thing. The first thing, the realization that happened to us is, in our country, it is not tea, it is chai. Because in our culture, chai. When you look at the difference is, when you see tea is a very Western concept. Tea in the Western world is a relaxant. The imagery associated with tea, when you go to the Western world, people sit in lounge chairs and then you dip the tea and then you have it, relax, and you have all kinds of conversations in the world. When it comes to us, in our culture, tea is not a relaxant. Chai is a stimulant. See how people say, like, chalo chai pi ke kaam karte, like, you have some work. You got up in the morning, like, people get disturbed if they don't have a cup of chai and all. It just like, it doesn't happen. It's a chai is stimulant. That I always say, my perspective is, I always say in India, we don't make chai, we actually cook chai. We put sugar in this, we put adrak in this, we put chini, we put milk in this, and we boil it to 100 degrees centigrade. After that, relaxation won't happen. It is absolute stimulation. That's what chai does to us. So that's one cultural context. When I look at it, in our culture, it is chai, it is not. The second thing what we realized is younger people, that was also the rise of social media, people rise of armchair activism or whatever we can call it. Younger people were not keeping quiet. Okay, this with the Nirbhaya thing and various kinds of things happening. They were getting up and expressing themselves. They're talking about the ills of the society. This should not happen and that should not happen and all. So what we said is these younger people are standing up for things. They're not taking things lying down. So we fused both the context. Like that's the beauty of it. We brought in the category context and brought in the people context. And what we said is when you had the cup of tea, it should not just wake you up, but it should awaken you. From waking up to awakening was the transformation we did. It should awaken you to the ills of the society. Then how you can take up and speak about that. That's the reason why we said like it took on the issues of corruption, it took on the issue of capitation fee and various kinds of things, and gender bias and various kinds of things. We said Har Subah Utho Mat Jagore was the transformation. That he should not just wake you up, but awaken you. That's the stance we have taken as a brand. So from then on, it became Brand to Stand. And then all the work that happened was about delivering on this, like which took up for elections. When the elections happened, we realized 49% of the voters in this country are women. But women in our culture are largely probably not our kind of audience, but a large part of the country. They were told either by their parent or the brother or the husband who to vote for. We said like women are facing these issues. आप सरकार बना भी सकते हैं, आप गिरा भी सकते हैं if you are 49%. Okay, we said like the power of 49, please exercise. And that's how consistently the brand got built on those issues. Like
fantastic story. Fantastic story.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Subbu, for that sharing that particular story and for the genesis of why brands should be taking a stand. Couldn't agree with you more actually, because for the newer generation, that's definitely something that people are looking at, the authenticity part and the engagement part. So absolutely. So I'm sure there will be quite a few observations and questions on that. But for the moment, let me come to Arijit and request him to take the floor with his take on some of the challenges from his perspective at NSE or otherwise, and relating to brands and communication. Go on, sir.
Yes, thank you, Subbu, and thank you, Arvind. And I think I'll just share my screen. And just. So, is the screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, in the exchange world, I think we have a slightly different kind of consumer behavior which we face. So if you see that over the years, I mean, if I give you a little bit of a background about how exchange has transformed. So initially we were doing trading under a banyan tree, and today we've come back to the screen, after 100, 150 years of exchange. So in that sense, the consumer behavior has changed significantly because the method of exchange has changed, and that has also changed the behavior of people who want to come into the exchange. This is a slide which actually takes you back in the history as to when exchanges were established. So if you see 1611 is when Amsterdam was established, Philadelphia in 1790, and if you see National Stock Exchange and Bombay Stock Exchange, these are the two which we have in India. 1875 BSE, Bombay Stock Exchange, and 1993 is when NSE was established. You would have probably seen and watched the Harshad Mehta scam, and that's when the need for trading on screens was, put in the parliament, and NSE was established. Before that, we had physical trading. Of course, New York Stock Exchange still has a bit of physical trading. So this is just a history of the exchange. Now, how's the behavior shifted? I mean, people. So
Um, Arijit, your voice is kind of breaking.
we are looking at. So if you see the numbers, the population which comes into the capital market, 35 to 40% in US and UK, shift into investing into capital markets. So when we say capital markets, so you have other asset classes. So you have real estate, you have gold. So that's more of a kind of a challenge which we face, rather than saying that how do we market to the consumers. I think our key theme is to encourage investing into the capital markets. Now, how's the audience changed? So, if I just give you some numbers, I mean, pre-pandemic, NSE was processing about 2 billion orders a day. Now we are doing about 12 billion transactions or orders a day. In terms of the audience which has come into the exchange, we've had about 10 crore, roughly around 10 crore new demat account which opened in the last 2 years. And this is largely in the younger group between say 25 to 35. So the audience has significantly changed in that sense. All exchanges are changing the way they are positioning or their way of talking to the consumers. This is some of the points which we're talking about. So ESG, as we all know, green bonds, UK Green Gilt, Luxembourg Green Exchange. So Luxembourg is the only exchange which is actually a green exchange, and it started listing green. And then we have sustainable bonds. So if you see the products which exchange is giving and which can go to the consumers and actually appeals to the consumer, and their behavior is largely on the sustainability platform or in the green platform. And even NSE as an exchange, I mean, within NSE also, I think we do a lot of things, which keeps the exchange green. Now, this is another shift which is happening. So we obviously have a lot of retail investor, but they're moving from offline to online. I think Professor mentioned, about Zerodha stock and other platforms which are coming in. So most of the investors which we've got during the pandemic, they have come in through online platforms. And these are platforms which have made it easy for consumers to come in. And this is just a campaign which I think I wanted to share with all of you. And this campaign is actually a moment marketing campaign from the Ogilvy days of mine. And this relates a lot to the exchange marketing also. So if you see in the last couple of World Cups, we did a Nifty 50. Now, what is Nifty 50? Nifty 50 is an index which the exchange benchmarks against. So every time a player scored a 50, we said, congratulations, Nifty 50. So that was, again, a moment marketing. So there are lots of things I think exchange is doing as a part of moment marketing, and how we are basically getting used to the consumer behavior, and in the process want more and more investors to come in and experience the capital market investment. So I think that's been a major thing. I'll just play this to you, and then I'll just So this is the campaign actually which broke the gender stereotypes. If you see the earlier campaign of Cadbury and this campaign, I'm sure you will understand what we are trying to say. Similarly, at the exchange side also, we had a lot of housewives who invested during the pandemic, and that was a unique experience for us. And we actually tried to see how we can connect with these housewives, what's the behavior pattern, and how we can get them more and more invested. So if you see our challenge at the exchange and the consumer behavior is not about investing, but it's more about the right investing. We came up with a campaign, and it's a tagline which NSE uses, which is Soch Kar Samajh Kar Invest Kar. Now, that tagline is primarily done because this is caution for investors. So you see, this is the traffic signal light. So when you say Soch Kar means you think about the investment. Samajh Kar means you get the right information, because nowadays you're bombarded with information. And there's a lot of information which goes out through Telegram channels and different channels, which are not authentic. And Nivesh Kar is, of course, Invest Kar. So this is a campaign, and this is a brand line which we are running, to just connect with the consumer. And I think more and more consumers are realizing that information which is gathered, has to be from the right resource and from the right authentic, source. So this is a tagline which we are doing, and I will just share with you the Revlon case study. I think we have spoken a lot about this case study. What happened to Revlon, as we all know, the New York-based company. Now it clearly struggled with competition like Estee Lauder and a host of smaller beauty brands. And clearly it was seen that Revlon was not able to keep pace with their rivals. So from the financial side, they had a high debt, and they also had a supply chain pain. And what finally we saw is that it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So in the financial world, if a brand gets into that kind of a scenario, then obviously a brand is not connected with the consumer, as we say, or not listened to the consumer. And we have many examples in the past. So we have Kodak, we have Xerox, and many examples. I'm sure all of you are aware, where we've not listened to the consumers and the consumer behavior and not been able to adjust to the new world which consumer. So at NSE, of course, we are quite kicked about how the consumer behavior is changing, because it keeps us changing our positioning and changing our brand campaigns. And we kind of are more and more aware, and we do a lot of perception study to understand as to where the consumer is coming from or how the consumer behavior is changing. I would like to end with that, and thank you very much, and back to Professor.
Thank you, Arijit, for sharing with us some of the changes that are happening in NSE and some of the campaigns that you've been involved with in the past. Let me start off the discussion by shooting a question that probably encompasses both of you guys. On one side, I heard Subbu say that brands need to take a stand, that they have to represent something and be authentic to customers. On the other side, you have customers, NSE is a good example, who are taking the lead to be able to engage with investing. One of the reasons why young people are taking the lead is, they are no longer in the same kind of long-term jobs, gig economy. They also want to save for the future and so on. So they are taking the lead over there. Now, on one hand, there is an implication that if a brand has to take a stand, it is, going out with something to the customer that it would like the customer to buy into. On the other hand, you have the customer themselves initiating some actions because the times are changing and they're engaging in new actions which have never been seen before. The NSE is a perfect example. You have 10 million new demat accounts, which are essentially keeping the market afloat in the face of a huge amount of withdrawal by the foreign portfolio investors. So where do these two meet? The company pushing an authentic brand at the customer coming and behaving in their own way and creating changes.
Okay. The point goes back to, Professor, what you had said. Actually, there's a line that you have said, buying into. I'll go back and refer to that, because that's exactly what is happening with the younger people. To me, I keep saying, there is plenty of information out there, overloaded actually. Everybody can access the best of the information. Everybody has knowledge about everything. Now, once upon a time, marketing, like, I'm sorry, I'm a student of marketing, but I'm saying marketing and brands got away by probably bluffing also sometimes. Many times it did happen. Let me honestly admit that. Today, you cannot do that because it's a very transparent world. So that's why I say It's no longer about buying. I have to buy into something. The point you said, I have to buy into something. When you have a purpose, when a brand has a purpose and brand takes a stand, what happens is that I bought into a belief of the brand. I have to buy into that. Now, by buying into that, what happens is now I become a believer of that brand. I'm not just a consumer of the brand, but I'm a believer of the brand. Probably I start becoming an advocate of the brand also. See, one popular example here, which is an easy example to quote because everybody can understand that, like a brand like Apple. Because as a consumer, I bought into the belief of the brand. Okay. Now that is the reason why I never questioned when they moved from computing into music. We never asked any question. From music, they got into mobile. We never asked any question. Then they got into wearables. I'm still not asking any question. Tomorrow, like they can get into any other category because fundamentally I bought into the belief of the brand. And then after that, whatever comes in, it's like putting a memory hook in my head. After that, they just go on hanging things there. And that's what exactly. And there's no better audience than the younger people to do in this country or anywhere in the world. Two-thirds of the population are young people, and we have to do business with them.
Ajit, what would you say?
So for NSE, actually, what is the experience of a consumer? So experience of a consumer is really when he or she comes into our platform and does the transaction. Now, there is one level you can say that there is only NSE and BSE where you can trade. So there is not really, you have to come to it. But on the other side, it's also the kind of the transaction trail. I mean, right from the transaction which is done to the settlement, which is the clearing corporation, which does the settlement. I mean, if your experience is not good, you probably go back to other forms of investment, so for us, I think it's very important that when a consumer comes in to the platform that he experiences a good journey right through. That's number one. Number two is that if you see screen-based trading, which has happened globally, now New York still has maintained a bit of a physical trading, just to keep the thing going, which is a nice thing. But globally, now everything is on screen. So you can pretty much see how the markets are moving when Singapore is opening or when US is closing and you have options, right? I mean, what is our competition is you have capital market. Now within capital market, you have oil, you have currency, you have stocks. So you have energy today, so you have different verticals where you can trade as well. So depending on which vertical and what's the consumer behavior shaping, I think our challenge is largely to listen to the consumer and see what the demands are and give them a nice, beautiful journey right through the trading platform. I think that's very, very critical. And then when the brokers disappear, just an example, when we put a notice on a broker, we do a forensic audit and large brokers have gone. For example, Carvey was one of the examples. That's when the trust in the market kind of goes down. So the investor says that, okay, I've been doing with Carvey. For us as a frontline regulator, I think it's more important for consumers to get that confidence and to connect with them in a way that they stay connected and say that, okay, this is a safe place and there is transparency and there is someone, who's looking after me. That's more of a line which we talk in exchanges.
Very interesting. If I build on the responses that both of you have just shared, I'm sure our people who are listening into to this webinar would have something similar to this. It's all very well for NSE, which is almost a monopoly, for Tata, which existed as a brand, and then Tata Tea got into some challenges. And so therefore, one worked to bring about some change in the way that people could buy into the brand, as you put it, Subbu, very nicely. But what about a new brand, right? I am an entrepreneur. We are in an age where people are doing startup like anything. I'm flabbergasted in some senses by the sheer scale of this entrepreneurial energy that I see amongst young people.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm a young chap and I'm starting up a business, then if I really want to be in there for the long haul, then I must construct a brand. But in this over-communicated world with all the behavioral biases that we have, where as a customer, I'm much more comfortable with something that's already there.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing this young chap trying to sell me something new.
Yeah.
It's going to be really, really tough to build any new brand in this over-communicated world. So the Tatas and the NSEs, they are in a very good place. They don't really have to do much. It's just like kind of maintenance activities. But for the new chaps, it's going to be really tough.
So,
Sorry,
okay.
go ahead, Arjun.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
Okay.
Professor, it's a great question that you asked. I'm glad you asked actually. And there are some cases which I have written in my book. For example, Paperboat was a startup when we had done that, a complete and out startup. And when we took a stance as a brand, saying that memories are the timeless taste of life. And it's a brand completely built on that platform, taking a stand. For example, Byju's, I've done in Byju's, done Swiggy, done Flipkart. These are all the cases which are there. These are all startups when they started in this country. And they were, again, now take a case like a Flipkart or a Swiggy or whatever, where Zomato also existed. There is nothing that I can differentiate one from the other on tangibles. Very difficult. Like, whatever these guys have got, they've got every damn thing is there. Even if I had one advantage based on a product or something like that, as I said, the shelf life of that is probably less than 24 hours. The only way for me to differentiate is by having a distinctive view on that, which is what I called it a point of view or a brand taking a standard. So, but it is, to me, it goes back, actually, I found in my experience, if you are a startup and if you are an entrepreneur who is driven by making a difference in the world rather than just creating an enterprise, I'll sell it off in 3 years and raise the valuation and make some money and get out. And that's a different case. All the entrepreneurs who are driven by a purpose, I found it far easier and also far more, I would say, far stronger in their own conviction and belief. Because when it comes to big corporation, Professor, what happens is the marketing people keep changing. Today, somebody is there. Another 3 years, somebody else comes in. 2.5 years, the average, probably, whatever it is. And whenever a new person comes in a big corporation, he wants to do something new. Okay, because otherwise, what will I say in my next job? That becomes the question. Whereas in the case of startups, in entrepreneurs, it's an entrepreneur's drive. It is his dream or her dream, which is making it a reality. And I found it in all these cases are probably more like a lot stronger to stick to.
Interesting. Interesting.
Let me just, what does a startup need? A startup needs a good brand and probably needs a capital, right? Capital raising. Historically in India, if you see, what used to happen is the business houses used to raise money from banks. And you would then, do your business, and then finally you would come to the exchange when you want to list yourself. We have a startup platform called NSE Emerge. Now, in that platform, you actually can come and list yourself. The only thing is that you have to declare your finances, you have to be transparent, and you have to do your due diligence. Now, when you raise money, and there have been serious sums which have been raised on these by startups, and they have gone and competed with big brands. I mean, we can give you the muscle, the capital raising, platform for a startup, which typically, if you're talking like big brands, they probably have the internal accruals or they can invest. But there is a startup exchange platform. And worldwide, if you see, startups actually go to the exchange to raise money. Only in India, it was slightly different, but it's changing very fast. So we have about, I think, 250 startups who are listed at the exchange who raise money and continue their business for long term. But as Subbu said, that these are long-term companies. These are not which want to just build a valuation game. Yeah. That I think is something we don't encourage, but we do give you a platform.
Absolutely.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's one point that I would also kind of really subscribe to, that if you want to build a brand, you have to be in there for the long haul. You cannot do it for 1 or 2 or 3 years if you're in the valuation game. Let me go to a question which has come. There's a question which is saying, in a world where competition is so high from Samriddhi, and if I'm not really competing to be a luxury or a premium brand, right? What is the role of costs in the whole idea of building a brand? How much attention do I need to pay to costs to be able to get a brand out there?
Cost in the sense, you say the investment in the brand. Is that the question?
Let me actually go to the person themselves and ask, is it possible for Smriti to clarify? Smriti, can you clarify your question if you're there? I'm not sure that she can hear me or reach out to me. I would say that there are two potential interpretations of the question. One is that if I have limited capital, so if I continue the discussion from an entrepreneur's perspective, right?
Right.
Most entrepreneurs will have a limited amount of funds that they have or they have raised and so on. So they need to be cautious about how they spend. And so therefore, how does that play into the building of the brand? So that could be one interpretation. The other is that I am not competing at the higher level where I can charge a fancy price, so I don't need to worry too much about the costs. I'm conscious of cost because my customers also have the price that they pay as a very large part of the brand that they buy.
Yeah, I would answer. I would give a perspective here, Professor. Like, see, it also when somebody, I think it's you asking about luxury and all those. See, in our culture, in our country, I feel now it's a choice one has to make. If you want to be a mass brand, two things which you have to get right in India. One is the pricing has to be correct. The other is the scale. These two have to come together for somebody to be a really successful brand. Because to me, India is still not a market where you can be a super premium luxury brand and operate in a niche way and be very profitable. Because I think it's the percentage, it's still there are some. That's the reason why many times when people say, why is Louis Vuitton not having an exclusive showroom? Why is it housed in a Taj hotel or a Marriott hotel and all? Yeah, it is like we still probably have to have some sort of evolution. I know it is changing. India is changing a lot. And there are a lot of people who are buying abroad, are spending money here. And they're all coming and setting up shops here and all that there. But there is no, I think like what are the things that helps here is particularly when you are a startup, when you are limited by funds, you are a lot more creative. Okay. How do I use today you have a lot more tools are there, a lot more, I would say, tools or the outlets to reach the audience, unlike in the past. And there are a lot of people who could do that. Like, for example, I may decide I won't get into the mass media. Now I will launch and try and build a brand completely through digital, which is possible today. It is possible if I have a consistent and relevant story. And there are a lot that are happening. And of course, mass media has its own advantages of reaching out to a larger audience. But sometimes, many times, I ask a question. Now, mass media by whose definition? For somebody, YouTube could be a mass medium today. It may not be a television at all. For a particular, when we talk about the younger audience, for somebody, Twitter could be a mass medium. Meta could be a mass medium kind of thing. It's a question of choice. How do I make the choice? And of course, money makes a big difference. If I have only this much money, I have to cut my cloth according to that and make the right choices, I would say, rather than splintering all over. But have a consistent story of the brand, because I can't, I notice, why I want to make this point is I notice this tendency of people getting caught because there is, you are caught in this attraction of multiple media today. The different kinds of things are there. I'll say this here, I'll say this here, I'll say this here. It's okay for an established brand. It's like, that's okay. But if you are a starting brand, if you're trying to establish a story, be consistent about that story.
Yeah. Mr. Sengupta, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so interesting. I think there's enough appetite in the capital market to fund and back startup brands. Let me tell you that. And if the startup brand is willing to be more disclosure oriented, as we say, they have to declare their financials and all. There is no dearth of capital, in the investors to back them up. And we've seen it with 250 brands here, about 400 brands at BSE. So there are enough startup brands which have come and raised money. So if that's a constraint, I think they should look at platforms to raise money.
Very interesting. There's one question which I think was directed at me because it is about bullets and motorcycles. Women are driving power motorcycles such as Bullet. Why not launch a special product line for them? So if it's the question for me and the motorcycle that I was sharing with you, showing with you, Mata Motorworks is right now targeting a particular segment. There is a reason for that, a business reason, that it needs a certain size of a segment, and the Apache Pulsar kind of buyer constitutes about 1.5 to 2 million sales every year. So if one gets even 10% of that, that's 150,000 bikes that you can sell. Whereas if you're targeting women who are going to ride a sporty bike, that's probably 5,000 per year. So that doesn't give me the scale that I want. There's one last question from a gentleman called Vikas Shukla. I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but I will read it out. What I observed that many times startups are not only limited about cost and scale, but also awareness about business and how to improve knowledge building and how to stick to a particular direction. Many of them may not have MBAs, and I'm amazed that people are so have created FOMO for even taking knowledge. What is your take? It's a new one. I haven't heard that before, Vikas, but I mean, let me take a first stab at it. Now, see, knowledge is knowledge, and that's why, many times when somebody tells me that I'm your customer, especially if my PGP or PGPX students tell me I'm your customer, so I say, no, you're not my customer. Because if you are a customer, then you're buying knowledge and you can get the benefit from the knowledge without putting in effort. And education is a product where unless you put in the effort, I as a professor or teacher can try however hard, it is not going to make a difference until the effort comes from you. And mostly customers are not willing to put in the effort. That's the nature of the beast called customer. And so therefore, by and large, knowledge mein FOMO hona nahi chahiye if the approach is the right way, that I'm here to get knowledge, and that requires a little bit of letting go of your ego and have some humility, because without that passion to learn, one cannot learn, and one will have the passion to learn, the desire to learn, only if there is acknowledgement that I don't know. By the way, I say in my classes sometimes I don't know, because if I don't know something, I should say I don't know something, and then that's how I will learn. So I am a little amazed to hear this FOMO for even taking knowledge. It shouldn't be there. I mean, I would very strongly recommend not to think of knowledge that way. I don't know what you guys want to add, Subbu and Aditi.
It's a beautiful thing that you said, Professor. Like, I would like to add something when you said about the knowledge can't be bought and it has to be. You see, is exactly when it comes to brand, I feel the same thing, because see, a lot of definitions about a brand can be given. But end of the day, if I have to put it in a common parlance as a simple thing, brand is a relationship. It's a relationship between two people, between the audience and then the intended the product or the service or whatever. Now, relationship is always a two-way mechanism. It cannot be one way. There's always and that's the reason why today I say today's younger audience we're talking about. People today not only buy brands, they also build brands along with us. There's a process of co-creation. That's why if I borrow from engineering, I always say the way brands should operate today, it's like cracking the source code and putting it in the hands of people. Have that open source culture. Allow people to participate in the brand, because today there are a lot more knowledgeable consumers, not more knowledgeable people. They have perspectives on how a product can evolve. So it's just out of, and particularly if they're very passionate about certain brands. Now look at some of the biggest brands in the world, brands like Nike and all. They benefit a lot from consumers' inputs. And people are designing things and then putting it back. And one of the best examples here is a brand like Lego. Now, Lego has this fantastic product called Lego Mindstorm. Now, it's a freely downloadable product development software. I can download it and I can create a product out of it. And if it gets 1,000 votes from the Lego universe, the Lego fan club, and it gets commercialized. And after that, for every unit that gets sold, I stand to gain a small percentage of the net sales or whatever. It's interesting, how even big brands are making the participation and more welcome and then co-creating.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Arijit the last question, and we should close after that because we're already 5 minutes over. The question is for you, Mr. Sengupta. With the rise in social media influencers showcasing their luxurious lifestyles after they've started investing, and overload of information when most of it is not useful, or with the hidden incentive of giving information with a purpose, how should a young person be able to trust a brand that they are investing in?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think there's a lot of talk going on this. So if you see, the regulator has come out with that they're going to track fin influencers, as they call. So these are all fin influencers, who, and they have also come out with artificial intelligence where they're going to track the television screen where recommendations happen. So there's a lot of work going on as to how we can track these influencers. And all I would say is that, I mean, go with the exchange information. I mean, whichever exchange you want to go with, because it's a neutral body, it's a regulator. Go ideally with the exchange, whatever we put up, a lot of information on our website, or whether it is New York, India, Singapore Stock Exchange, because we are a neutral body. And so for us, any transaction, whether it goes up or down, we earn, right? For us, we have no interest there. So, in fact, more transactions, we earn more. I mean, that's our revenue model. But we are not for revenue. We are here as a regulator to warn investors. That's what exactly I said. So please go with authentic information of either exchange-based products. And there is a lot of work which is happening to track these fin influencers. There are a lot which have come up in the last couple of years. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Sengupta, Mr. Subramanieshwar. I just want to take a moment to say thank you on behalf of myself and for the audience. Both of you guys gave some very interesting insights on the side of taking a stand for brands, and also some of the challenges of being a regulatory type of institution like NSE, which is almost building a market and helping people engage with brands. Your NSE Emerge was a very nice piece of information, I think, which is very relevant to, I guess, I would suspect, to many of our audience members. And so please do take advantage of that to the extent that you can. Thank you all again for your time. Time for us to call it a wrap. Thanks, Subbu. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Subbu.
And thank you, Mr.
Thank you very
Sengupta.
much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks.